And of course, food source plays into that as well. Again, coyotes being as highly adaptable as they are, a lot of people think they're primarily carnivores. They're feeding on acorn mass. They're feeding on raspberries. I mean, they are opportunistic feeders 100%. They're going to go after apples. I mean, apple orchards are a great place to find coyotes. Cornfields. They're going to take full advantage of corn. Probably 90% of the calls I get for coyote control, you would think it's people's house pets or deer hunters. It's corn growers.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 239. Jeff Traynor, Trapping the Coyote. Support for the Big Buck Registry and the Deer Hunt Podcast comes from Hunter's Blend Coffee. Awaken your hunt with coffee purchased directly from farmers around the world, creating jobs and alleviating poverty. Hunter's Blend Coffee, we're hunters too. Polar Works Coolers and the Chill Zone, specializing in the most durable, reliable thermal cups and coolers. Keep your drinks hot or cold in any element. Black Ash Outdoor Products reduce your risk of tree stand suspension trauma with the Tree Stand Wingman, the Tree Stand Emergency Descender System. The Enforcer, take control of your odor footprint with your personal ozone generator. Covert Scouting Cameras, remote cameras for hunting, wildlife, and security. The Horny Buck Seed Gummy, it's all about the freshest seed. Morse's Sporting Goods, a full line of sporting goods without the sales tax. And Big Buck merch. You can get cool, high-quality Big Buck t-shirts, long-sleeve t-shirts, and hoodies. And show support for this podcast by visiting www.bigbuckregistry.com/MERCH. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hello, this is Cuz Strickland with Mossy Oak, and you're about to listen to the podcast that I listen to 16 and a half hours nonstop. The Big Buck Registry is the best out there.
Hi, this is Dan Infold from HuntingBeast.com. You're about to listen to one of my favorite podcasts, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hey, this is Travis T-Bone Turner with Bone Collector and Real Tree Road Trips, and you're about to listen to another great episode of the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow predators. My name is Jay, and thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. For Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller and the entire staff here at the Big Buck Registry, welcome to this week's show. There are a couple things I'd like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please check us out on iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review. With your help, we're going to try and push this show up the iTunes charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to leave a review and subscribe to the show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access and notification each and every week that a new show is released. You can also access this show in its entirety on YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Play. It's all right there for you to access on demand at your fingertips. Regarding the harness program, we have an ample supply of harnesses to give away from our volunteer donors. If you're in need of a full-body harness, please send an email to j@bigbuckregistry.com. Jeff Traynor is a professional trapper from New Hampshire and has a really good trapping website at livefreeandtrap.com. We thought it might be interesting to explore the trapper's world and see how it can be relative to a deer management program. Jeff's mission at Live Free and Trap is to show us the world of modern fur trapping and all its associated trades and activities revolving around trapping, such as seasonal fur, biology, data collection, fur handling and usage, wildlife control, animal damage management, and overall wildlife species health and sustainability. We go long on coyote trapping and explore the rich history of the trapper, the myths, the legends, and its modernization as we know it today. We'll turn to our entire interview with Jeff Traynor in just one moment, but before we do, let's turn to Jim Keller for the Deer News.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. Our first story this week, Georgia politicians introduce bill to get kids outdoors. This story is from the deeranddeerhunting.com website and was reported by Chris Behrens. On January 22, 2018, Georgia's Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle and Senator Tyler Harper, chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, introduced the Georgia Youth Outdoors Passport Act, aimed at encouraging the state's youth to experience the abundance of rich outdoor resources and recreational opportunities unique to the state. Specifically, the legislation 1. Establishes the Outdoor Passport License Program, which allows first-time Georgia hunters and anglers of all ages to receive an outdoor passport license, granting them the ability to fish and hunt many types of game at a reduced cost during the first year participating in the program. 2. Offers discounted licenses to those who complete the program and elect to purchase licenses for the next season. 3. Creates an outdoor mentor training program at the Department of Natural Resources, allowing Georgia hunters and anglers to teach the state's celebrated pastimes to the next generations so they too can enjoy nature's beauty. And 4, provides mentors who participate in the program incentives to encourage more seasoned outdoorsmen, women, to register. It's concerning that every year fewer Georgians are participating in hunting and fishing activities across our state. This reduces the resources we have available to protect and preserve Georgia's natural habitat, making it harder to keep rangers in the field enforcing our safe hunting and fishing laws. This program will help create a pathway for new hunters and anglers to learn the sport and develop a lifetime recreation that will teach them the importance of the natural world and help them put food on the table, said Lieutenant Governor Cagle. The Georgia Youth Outdoors Passport Act has been introduced in the state Senate where swift action is anticipated. England's Deer Initiative. This story is based on information I discovered regarding a deer conservation program in England. The Deer Initiative Partnership was established in 1995 to promote the sustainable management of wild deer in England and was extended to Wales in 1999. It is made up of a broad partnership of statutory, voluntary, and private organizations with a shared vision for the sustainable management of wild deer. The 6 species of deer, 4 were introduced, living in the UK are increasingly in distribution and number. To manage deer sustainability, England faces certain challenges. Deer often have a specific impact on vulnerable habitat as well as agriculture and forestry, tree planting schemes, and green spaces. Deer tend to range over large areas beyond site boundaries and need to be managed on a landscape scale. Deer are among the largest wild mammals in the UK, and collisions with vehicles are serious and costly. Annually, up to 74,000 collisions with 10 to 20 human fatalities and up to 700 human injuries. Control of zoonoses and livestock disease require monitoring and surveillance in deer, and specific standards and skills are needed to ensure safe, effective, humane management of deer, including in the urban environment. The Deer Initiative is working with a wide range of stakeholders to tackle all of these challenges and are helping their partners in government to develop the right framework to support this. Their government funders include DEFRA, which is the Department of Environment, Food, and Rural Affairs, the Forestry Commission in both England and Wales, Natural England, and Natural Resources Wales. They also get significant support from the private and voluntary sectors via partners and other stakeholders. About half of the resources come in-kind support, such as non-cash contributions. This is a very interesting website, and I will continue to watch it for future stories. If you are interested, please check it out at www.thedeerinitiative.co.uk. For the first time, CWD is found in Mississippi deer. This story is from the Outdoor News website. The discovery of Mississippi's first deer infected with chronic wasting disease has prompted wildlife officials to request people avoid feeding deer. Monday's Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries release says that a 4-year-old buck was found dead and emaciated in late January near the Louisiana border. It tested positive for CWD on January 29th, and the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks banned feeding deer in several counties. The LDWF has also asked several other counties to stop feedings. Mississippi is the 25th state to confirm the disease presence. Illinois DNR launches new white-tailed deer website. This story is from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources website. White-tailed deer are an integral part of the Illinois landscape, and a new website called White-tailed Deer Illinois provides up-to-date information on deer biology, management, research, and regulations. White-tailed Deer Illinois is a collaborative effort led by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Division of Wildlife Resources, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration, and the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center. Funding for the White-tailed Deer Illinois website was made available through federal aid in the Wildlife Restoration Project W-147-T. White-tailed Deer Illinois is a digest of biological information and interesting facts to provide users with valuable insights into the life history and management of the Illinois state mammal. The site also contains information on white-tailed deer stakeholders groups such as hunters, landowners, wildlife watchers, and more, how deer hunting regulations are set, and deer predation and deer population control limits. Scientific research activities related to deer and deer hunting are also presented. Several features of the site for the first time Several features of the site for the first time provide users with levels of information previously unavailable. Users have access to a searchable database of deer vehicle accidents and are able to plot accidents on a state road map by year from 2002 to 2012, month and day. A second searchable database allows users to search IDNR annual deer harvest data and Illinois Department of Transportation annual deer vehicle accident rate data. The user may select the county and a range of years from 1989 to present and view an image displaying both the total deer harvest and annual DVA information. White-tailed Deer Illinois also features an online form of reporting sick and diseased deer. This process will greatly speed the collection and tracking of potential incidents of episodic hemorrhagic disease, which is EHD, and chronic wasting disease. The new website is available at the following link, deer.wildlifeillinois.org. And just a final reminder for any of our listeners around Michigan listening to this on its release day, I will be at the Michigan Deer and Turkey Expo at the Lansing Center on Saturday. I'll be the guy in the Big Buck Registry hoodie, so please stop and say hi if you see me. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Well, thanks to Jim Keller for the Deer News. Without further ado, here is Jeff Traynor. Jeff Traynor, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Big Buck Registry Studios.
This is it. This is the kingdom right here where all the magic happens.
It is. You've been here before.
Sure.
When we talked to Fred, where I was the producer on that show, and you came to our studio, and this happens to be the same studio that the BBR is produced in.
Sure.
So we invited you back to the studios, but this time for the Big Buck Registry, because there's some things I want to talk about that you do every day that I'm sure listeners of this show would love to incorporate into their daily routine or into their lifestyle as a hunter, that you have some extreme knowledge about.
Sure.
And in this case, it's coyote hunting, or coyote trapping, I should say.
Yep.
Trapping, as we discussed in the pre-show, is another form of hunting for a lot of ways, and you make a profession out of trapping critters in a sense where they're pests.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. There's different gamuts of it, but it all kind of rolls into one way or another. Whether you do it just as a hobby, or whether you're in the commercial side of implementing trapping as a nuisance control thing, they're a little bit deviations, but they're still the same parallel idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we should explore that whole concept. Like, can a hunter add trapping to their routine? And how addictive is it? And there's definitely some challenges out there when it comes to trapping. I mean, it's probably got some heavier negative connotations from the antis than a lot of other things.
Low hanging fruit.
Fruit. It's really easy to pick off, the trapping aspects. But I think there's a need there, and I think there are a lot of people that would probably want to do some of that trapping too, in addition to the regular hunting that they do. I know I do, only because, I hunt the coyotes. I try to hunt the coyotes. I feel like I want to increase my success rate. And I think trapping, would give me a higher education of the animal.
Oh, God, yeah.
Right? And I think that's where there's an extreme differentiation between the trapper and the hunter in a lot of ways. That the trapper, almost you need a even more intimate knowledge.
Oh, definitely. Okay. Yeah, it's one of these situations where, and we had spoken about it on Fred's show, but I don't want to trump on the validity of one group of activities over another.
Right.
But when you're talking about trapping, the fact is that there's a lot more variables, and the odds are less in your favor when you're doing trapping. And people that aren't familiar with trapping would think that it's the opposite, that, you're just throwing a trap out in the woods, or you're throwing a dozen traps out in the woods and you're leaving for the night and that trap's still operating. But you got to keep in mind, other than a little bit of scent down inside a hole or some kind of a tractor to bring that animal in, for the most part, you're trying to get that animal to step on a space the size of a silver dollar.
Right.
It's not the same as shooting 200 yards or whatever the case may be through a scope. You have to actually anticipate within inches of how that animal is going to approach that trap and how they're going to get caught. And all of that plays into how successful you are.
Okay.
So, yeah, intimacy is probably priority number one.
Okay. All right. We definitely want to get into that. And there are attacks on trappers, and you just recently wrote a blog post that I read, and there are this is just crazy in the state of New Hampshire. I guess it's not crazy because I know that the antis are out there, but trying to shorten the season for coyote hunting during the mating season of the species.
Correct. Which
is right about now. So I'd like to get into that a little bit more, find out where that all came from, and then I don't know if you can, because I've never asked you if you're a deer hunter. I assume you are.
To a degree.
To a degree.
And it's going to play in some of the questions you've already asked, but we'll go there.
Because I want to see if you can tell us a deer hunting story, a favorite one of yours. And if you have one, great. If not, that's fine. But it's like one of the telltale parts of the show is we try to tell a good deer story before we leave. And I've got 10 rapid-fire questions for you.
Sure.
Before the end of the show. Let's start with who you are, where you're from, how did you get into trapping, and how did you get into the profession of trapping these critters as a lifestyle?
Sure. Well, my name's Jeff TRAYNOR, right here in New Hampshire, born and raised my entire life, and I'm actually pretty proud of that, as are most people that are New Hampshire born and raised.
We're proud, man. We're proud folk.
Granite staters, but yeah, I grew up born and raised. My father was originally from Massachusetts, but he spent a lot of his personal time growing up. He would just take these personal retreats up to the Allagash region of Maine in the middle of nowhere back in the 70s and 80s when it was a little different. Back then, you didn't quite have all these regulations and all kinds of people floating around, so it was still a very rural area. And he would just go up there with a backpack, sometimes a tent, a canoe, and spend the weeks up there. And he was never a trapper. He would snare rabbits for dinner here and there while he was up there, but he never actually got into real trapping. And he also wasn't really a big hunter. He was a big-time fisherman. He did a little bit of hunting here and there, certainly, but wasn't a big-time hunter or trapper that got me into all this. It was the romance of that self-reliant lifestyle.
Yeah.
And it was the romance of that picturesque mountain man type imagery that you get when you think of a fur trapper.
Right.
That's what originally got me into it, got me thinking about it. And my father, in the small town that I grew up in, not such a small town anymore, but back then it sure was, we had a couple of cornfields along a river that ran behind the house. And every weekend he would take me out there. We'd take these walks, and he wouldn't tell me what any of these critters were, but he would point and he would show me, can you identify that? Show me what kind of track that is. Which way was that animal going? What was that animal doing? And he would quiz me on this stuff. And as a kid, it's just innocent enough kid stuff. But looking back on it now, I mean, he was setting me up to be quite a woodsman when you really think about it. You could tell how deep a buck's tracks are into the ground. You can tell whether they're running or walking or sprinting, which way they're going. Are they stopping to feed here? What's that fox doing over there? Just by following those tracks and reading that map. Mm-hmm. And basically what that did was, without knowing it, when you're a kid, you don't think any better. It's just entertainment. But as you get older, it kind of deep-seated that tracker mentality. So flash forward probably about 5-10 years from that, I was probably about 14 years old or so, and I actually found this old foothold jump trap, rusty old trap buried in the dirt in my backyard from somebody eons ago. You could tell it was old. Wow. It wasn't a legal trap by today's standards, obviously, so it was definitely 1930s, 40s, 50s, somewhere in there.
Right.
But basically, it further developed this interest in the trapping and the mountain man aspect. Just like, how does this trap work? How are you going to catch something with this? And I would analyze it and let it go for a few more years. Didn't really think too much of it. And I had a buddy that was a really big deer hunter, still is. He's a good friend of mine. And we would go out and do coyote night hunting.
Yeah.
We would wait till January. We'd wait for the full moon nights. Yeah. No spotlight, no nothing. We'd just go out there in the pitch black, and we wouldn't even use calls. We'd just howl. And we'd actually get these guys, get these coyotes to respond to us. And let me tell you something right now. You want to see the hair stand up on the back of your neck.
Right.
Belt out this cheesy howl that you think is the most silliest thing in the world, and then get a response from 4 different individuals around the valley that you're in.
Right.
And it really, it's a really cool thing. But from there, it just blossomed even more. I was at one of these sportsman shows about a decade ago or so, 12 years or so, and Fish and Game booth was there, and I said, "You guys still allow trapping in this state?" And the guy that was there, he said, "Oh yeah, it's tough work. It's a lot of work, but certainly sign up for a class and get into it." I signed up for the class, was hooked ever since.
Gotcha. Trapping to me is just a fascinating element of our lifestyle, the hunter itself. But it has deep, rich roots in the heritage of the United States of America.
Oh yeah.
Can you speak of some of what you know to be true about maybe even like the fur trade, the beaver trade? That that there are TV shows now that in history documentaries that tell you that fur trade was the backbone of the finances of the early stages of the United States.
And that's exactly it. It was the backbone. Yeah. I mean, that's you can have some people today try and argue that, but literally, beaver pelts were our currency,
right,
for a very long time as this country was being developed.
Right.
We were in a new land. We had Native Americans that were here that had been procuring these creatures and using them for their fur garments and their buckskin attire and things like that. But fur-bearing species have that natural warming, insulating property to them. It's why these animals develop fur in the wintertime, to keep warm and survive. So by proxy, it just makes sense that we would use that for our own survival in cold climates. And basically, when when settlers moved in and started building this country, the trapping and trading of beaver pelts, especially, was just a cornerstone of commerce.
Yeah,
it was
right.
It was probably one of our original trades, was trapping.
Definitely,
so.
No question about it. And it, and with it brought the fight for the colonies and the certain areas and territories, and they're fighting for the rights to
the prime land, baby.
Prime land, and came with it like deceit and fraud and all this other stuff.
Sure,
that went with it. But it's
all the typical things that come with society were started right there.
Society and economics. It's all right there. Fascinating stuff. Do you think that there is room in a deer hunter's life for trapping of the coyote?
Yes.
Okay.
I do. Going back to, you had asked how much of a deer hunter I am, and I can tell you, being a trapper, there's not a lot of time.
Not a lot of time to be a deer hunter.
But again, that's in the respect that I'm targeting muskrat, beaver, mink,
right?
Fisher, raccoon, coyote, the whole 9 yards. So I'm tending to that land a lot more than someone that's primarily focused on coyote trapping. If a deer hunter goes out, he's on his way to his deer stand or whatever the case may be. Throw a couple traps out if you got rights to the property, and it doesn't hurt. They're not doing you any good in the back of the truck. You might as well set them out and see what you get on your way to your deer stand.
Gotcha. The reason I want to talk about coyote trapping in particular is because through the conversations we've had with Fred Eichler and with Al Morse from Fox Pro, there's undeniably the coyote is an extremely versatile being.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And they will find ways to survive and adapt to any environment. But they are probably one of the best predators on the planet, and one of their, of course, main sources could be deer.
Absolutely.
And that affects deer hunters.
Yep.
Right?
Sure.
Predation is an issue.
It's our competitor.
Granted, there is a balance. There is a balance in nature. We don't want to kill all the coyotes, and that could be bad too.
Depending on who you talk to.
Correct. There's someone that just want them all. But you can try to kill all of them.
Yeah, you're not going to be very
try
successful.
To hunt them. You can and trap them. Chances are you're not going to ever kill all of them.
Right.
They have an incredible reproductive capacity.
Right.
When in need, they somehow find a way to increase their production.
Absolutely.
So and you can, I don't know if this is all accurate, but this is what we've learned from the guest on the show, that these things are incredibly adaptable.
Yes, that's 100% true.
Okay.
That's evident by the fact that in the span of 3-4 decades, this animal that supposedly all facets of science says wasn't here, and when I say this, I'm referring to the eastern coyote, the variant of the traditional western coyote. The eastern coyote was never here. We had wolves here. We extirpated them. That coyote, that eastern coyote now, not only was able to create itself through interbreeding and coming back down into New England and the eastern seaboard, but you're finding them in the rural outposts of Alaska through Canada, all the way to Long Island in people's backyards.
Right.
You want to talk about an adaptable critter?
Right.
I mean, it's like I said in my blog article. I'm not saying protect all the coyotes, but at the same time, I got to tip my hat to those guys. Those coyotes, I'll tell you right now, have learned to adapt with us.
Right.
And as we progress, they're one of the only creatures that has had the ability to adapt with us as well.
Yeah. Right.
So.
And their population control, no matter how much of a beating you put on them, is uncanny.
Right.
It's like they just morph. Like you know what I mean? It's like they just recreate another one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well those same principles can be found when you get down to the brass tacks of that. The coyote has an ability to certainly promote that. But you look at any species. I mean, look at our deer. We have hunting seasons on our deer so that we promote healthy and abundant herds of deer.
Right.
And you could apply that to any other of these species, including the coyote. Modern hunting, we're certainly controlling and managing populations at the local level. But at the same time, we're strengthening them as a game species. And I guess that argument comes down to whether or not you revere the coyote as a pest. Nothing but an invasive species that isn't even supposed to be here, was developed, as an invasive species.
Right.
Or if you look at them as a game animal, which, let's face it, I've kind of jumped on the train of if you can't beat them, join them. We've tried to extirpate and remove the eastern coyote for decades, and we've been unsuccessful. So I think the time now is accept the fact that they're here and let's manage them.
Right. So to me, as a deer hunter, it's in your best interest to hunt the coyote in addition to hunting the deer and everything else you like to hunt.
Sure.
To ignore the predator species as part of your game plan is probably not a fail, but it is certainly not a win. I think you have to have like a complete package here. You need to hunt the coyotes if you're going to hunt the other animals. You need to predator hunt simply for population control, because they may not have as many predators upon them. I mean, I'm sure that starvation might fall into play at some point.
Mange, disease,
there's all kinds of
vehicle
things.
car crashes, whatever the case may be.
Right.
But, I mean, it's important to keep in mind that we don't lose sight of the whole point of the North American model of conservation.
That's right.
You can't sit there and say, I want to wipe all these coyote out.
Right.
And when you start getting down to the idea of quote-unquote responsive reproduction, or, if they're so adaptable, maybe I shouldn't be hunting them because then they're just going to keep breeding and breeding and breeding. Well, you got to look at that through a certain set of lenses and sit there and say, on the local level, they still need management. We still need to manage those populations, or we're going to have major issues that amount to. Take a look at the situation with the famous country singer up in Nova Scotia. She was killed by coyotes while she was jogging, and that's a simple fact of these animals losing fear of humans, adapting as they're very capable of doing, and taking a hold on their animal instincts, and it's not, you got to find that middle ground of, you don't want to completely wipe them off the face of the earth, but at the same time, you do need to manage them just like every other fur-bearing species. So.
Right. You want to keep them wild.
Exactly.
And let them know that there is a dominant species on the planet.
Right.
And that we're here to
That's us.
That's us. We want to keep all species alive on the planet as best as we can, right? So as a hunter and a non-trapper, you're trying to figure out, well, I want to hunt the coyotes. I've tried hunting coyotes. I'm trying to get better at it. I need to probably do it more to educate myself. But I'm also fascinated with this concept of trapping. Now, is trapping coyotes versus hunting coyotes, what are the major differences? And is one easier than the other?
Depends on who you talk to. I mean, the benefit to trapping as opposed to hunting is the fact that you're not posted out all night, freezing your buns off, waiting for something to come by. You're basically setting the trap, and you're able to continue on, and you're increasing your odds by adding traps on what we would call a trap line, which is a length of a tract of land that you're setting traps every X amount of distance or what have you, to increase your odds of successful capture. So the benefits there are that you can certainly increase your odds to certain degrees outside of hunting. which can certainly be a benefit if you're kind of looking to shorten or tighten the population around there.
Okay. Let's get into some of the more intricate details of trapping. If I'm brand new to the concept, but I really am intrigued by it, where do you start? What am I going to do to prepare myself to become just a novice entry-level trapper?
Trapper's education.
Okay.
I'm going to promote that till I'm blue in the face because
makes sense.
I'm very weary of people who jump to YouTube or jump online and say, oh, that looks easy. Go out and buy some traps. Then they go out on their grandfather's land or whoever's property without a license or without any education, start setting traps like crazy. There's certain aspects that you need to understand. There's certain modifications you can make to traps. There's certain things you need to keep in mind when you're setting traps based on the location you're at. We don't want to be catching non-target animals or having something that's improperly staked down. The next thing you know, we're on the news with some fox or something running through the woods with a trap on its foot because it wasn't properly staked down.
Right. That doesn't look good.
Education. Yeah. Trapping is the low-hanging fruit because not a lot of people partake in it, and I think a lot of that is due to how much work is involved with it, but it's also due to the fact that, like a rifle or a bow or like anything else, you got to be properly educated on what you're using, and when you're not, bad things happen.
Right.
So I always stress, go through your state trapper's education course first.
Okay.
And get savvy on how things work, why we use what we use, when we use it, and go through all the basics of best management practices so that you're properly well-versed in that. So that'd be the starting point, would be trapper's education.
A local trapper's education course where you go start. What do they cover in that kind of thing? I mean, you're talking clearly the devices that we're using today are different than the devices that our forefathers used.
Yeah.
And I mean, they have this, medieval brutal look to them. If you look back 100 years.
Nice sharp teeth.
Yeah.
And,
Right? They look like a painful medieval device.
Right.
And you can see how the middle ground, the antis are always the antis. They're always going to be against this. But that middle ground, they start looking at that stuff.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, they're like, this is not how we want things to happen.
Right.
And so I can see how the trapping got kind of in their crosshairs, gave the antis more ammo.
Yep.
And gets beat on even more than the hunting does, even though hunting gets beat up enough.
Sure.
But it's low-hanging fruit, man. You're looking at these devices that just look brutal.
Yeah.
Right.
And take a look at popular culture, okay? When you think of a trap, when you think of type the word bear trap into Google and see what you come up with. You're going to have these cartoon pictures with these giant teeth and these big evil springs, and then you start thinking about animals chewing their feet off and this, that, and the other thing. And there is absolutely no denying. I can't sit here with a straight face and say that trapping doesn't have a very, very dark history.
Right.
Because you got to figure that before the advancement of conservation and before the advancement of the North American model, it was a commerce. So basically like a lobster fisherman or anything else, you were out there to make a profit off pelts. You weren't necessarily out there managing. You weren't out there for your own benefit. It was a money game. And let's face it, back in the 30s, animal welfare wasn't exactly at the forefront. It was hierarchy over our species. So there wasn't a lot of attention paid to animal welfare. And the best thing I can say is that it sounds kind of crazy, but I'm glad we went through that because you've been able to actually establish what we shouldn't be doing. And we've been able to work off of that and develop modern traps that are the same traps that biologists use for radio collaring animals for studies. I mean, these same traps that we use in the field are used by biologists, and there's not too many, three-legged critters running around the woods from these scientific studies. And that's where we needed it to go, was basically something that we call here in America the best management practices. Basically, we set guidelines for what's humane and what's not humane and how to properly engage in trapping activities in the woods.
Okay. So you're saying that the devices that are out there today are humane traps,
yes,
in a sense, but they still do the job that you need them to do.
When used properly.
When used properly, will capture the animal in a safe way and can allow that animal to be released should you choose them to be released, or you can there's what's the word that you use when you come upon an animal that you're going to not euthanize, but you're going to put it down.
Dispatch.
Basically
dispatch
See
the
that?
animal.
Yeah. That's what I want to get out of, because the word dispatch, I always love the dispatch word.
Yeah. Well, it's
a great word.
It's, it is, and it's accurate for what's going on here. Because I mean, let's face it, we're not you can go down that rabbit hole of morals and terminology, but at the end of the day, I'm not really killing anything.
Right.
That would suggest, an attack on fellow man. I'm harvesting and I'm dispatching. You may not like those terms, but that's what they are.
Right.
Where I'm the apex predator, and in a scientific, regulated fashion, I'm harvesting and dispatching.
Right. I love the dispatch word. It just has such a nice resonance to it. It's not overly brutal.
Right.
It's not overly kind. It's kind of straight and to the point.
Yep.
But has a subtlety to it.
Sure.
Dispatch.
Sure.
That you could share that with the middle ground. Dispatch.
And I do regularly.
And it wouldn't alarm them.
Right.
That's a good word to use.
And that's what people need to understand. I mean, these are the same things that go on in our slaughterhouses. When you eat your cheeseburger, guess what? That cow wasn't killed. That cow wasn't murdered.
Right.
It was put down or dispatched.
Right.
So.
Right. That's a great word. So tell us about some of the trap setups that you would use for the coyotes, and then we'll get into kind of how you decide where to place them and the habitat that you're working in, and the whole maintenance of the thing. It seems like if you go hunting, if you see them, you shoot, you kill.
Yep.
But in the trapping thing, you go home and you don't have to go back the next day. But you've got a live trap out there that takes some responsibility.
You're committed.
You
need to be committed.
Right. So what are the traps looking like these days? How do they function? What are the safety devices on them?
Well, basically the most effective trap, there's several different variants of traps. We have cage traps, we have snares, we have conibear style body gripping traps. Those are all, well, at least the snares and the body gripping traps for the most part are lethal traps. They're not going to work for coyotes. For coyotes in the lower 48, the optimal trap to be using is what we would call the foothold trap, which basically is still that cartoon memory of the steel jaws with the teeth.
Sure.
The only difference is there's been modifications to them. We don't use teeth anymore. Teeth have been removed from all modern traps, and to my knowledge, I haven't even seen too many still in people's collections. I think most of your tooth traps have pretty much gone by the way of the scrap pile, but they've made modifications to the jaws. Basically, there's a pan. You set your jaws open. The pan is sitting there. When the animal depresses on the pan, the springs force these jaws to shoot up and basically close around the animal's paw. It's important that I use the terminology foothold trap, not leg hold trap.
Yeah.
I can usually tell when I'm talking to someone that doesn't know anything about trapping when they come at me with the term steel-jawed leg hold trap, because most of the species we're not catching them by the leg. We're catching them by the pad or the paw of the foot.
Okay.
And it's basically just holding them there. That has more surface area there, more surface tension, so we're not actually cutting into bone. They're not panicking from chewing their feet off and things like that. There's several modifications that have been done to those modern foothold traps. One is called lamination. So basically by thickening the jaws, it's more surface area. We're not biting into any skin. It's just restraining. There's also something called offset jaws. Basically, it's a small gap that runs down the middle of each jaw so that when the jaw closes, they're still allowing blood flow to the entire limb.
Gotcha.
The big myth with animals chewing their feet off was primarily from raccoons. Back in the old days, the traps would close so tight on their paws that they lose feeling under the paw. Basically, they'd lose feeling on the limb that was underneath the trap, and that's what they'd be chewing on.
Yeah.
So we corrected that by putting these offset jaws on to allow blood flow, promote blood flow to the animal. Another modification is swivels.
Okay.
Basically, in the chain system for the trap where it's staked down to the ground, there's these swivels that allow the trap to continue to spin. So no matter how the animal is pulling or moving around in a circle, if you ever look at any videos of animals caught in modern traps that are properly used, you'll see that the animal's able to move that limb all the way around however he'd like.
No kidding.
And the reason for that is to allow that free movement so that we're restraining the animal, but we're not causing broken bones or anything like that as they struggle.
Yeah.
Another adaptation would be what's called a tension spring or a shock spring. Basically, it's a spring in the line of the chain, so as the animal pulls on the trap, the shock spring is actually absorbing that tension. So we're not dislocating limbs or anything like that if the animal is stuck in the trap. That spring is actually taking all of that tension.
Yeah.
So those are just a few of the modifications that modern traps have been made to make them more humane and actually, in retrospect, make them more successful.
Okay. All right. I mean, I could see how let's say you own a farm. I mean, not that people in New Hampshire necessarily own that much acreage, but I mean, there are definitely farms out in the Midwest and things like that, or even the lands that you hunt where you have a deer management strategy. And I would think that with that deer management strategy, you should have a predator management strategy.
Sure.
It's part of the plan.
Sure.
It's got to be.
You should be.
Right. So you can hunt them, or it seems like trapping could be more effective. Can you speak to that, whether it can be a more effective tool if you're good at it?
It can be more effective in the sense you're
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
You're right. You're coming from the sense of the element of surprise. So even when you're hunting, and there's exceptions to every rule, but a lot of times you're dealing with calls, you're dealing with blinds, you're dealing with possible scent contamination from yourself. All of those things kind of get reduced when you're doing trapping because you're not there.
Okay.
The trap is hidden under the dirt. Coyote's just doing what he's normally going to do. He's trotting around. He's looking for, small mouse holes with food in them, or, anything that stands out in his territory. Because, again, the eastern coyote, the coyotes that we have here on the East Coast, very territorial creatures. And they set up in family units. So they're going to be patrolling those territories every night. So basically, you've got the elements of surprise with trapping.
Okay.
They're not seeing, there's less chances of being exposed of a human hanging out there waiting to pick them off when you've got the traps out.
Makes sense. All the animals that are hunted, or even not really hunted that much, they're always super keen to a difference in their environment, right? The deer know when a hunter is probably around. They can, and it might not be, you might be completely scent free, but the sound of the four-wheeler pulling up to the gate a quarter mile away, that keys them off, because every time that happens, they hear there's walking coming through the woods.
And even with trapping, I mean, I should add to that, an extra section on there. For years and years and years, it was straight religion that you didn't compromise the scent of your traps. I mean, guys, I've seen all kinds of extensive ways to limit scent. These guys will hang their traps out in the woods for 6 months before the season starts just to make sure they're air dried. They're using special gloves and special pants that, don't have any scent on them because again, you do run the risk of, if there is scent contamination there, instead of the coyote going after the bait that's behind the trap, they're smelling something that's on the trap and they're digging it up, and you're going to come up to find a sprung trap with it dug out of the dirt because they actually found it.
Gotcha.
And that does happen from time to time, but I've started to, and I'm probably not going to make any friends by admitting this because it is such a religion, but in more recent years, I've kind of foregone a lot of my scent contamination because, let's face it, the coyotes are living with us.
Right.
They smell us all the time. They know we're there.
Right.
So a little bit of human scent, I don't think, is going to be that big of an issue when it comes to trapping. With hunting, sometimes that's a different scenario depending on the situation.
That's an interesting perspective, because a lot of times, like if you put up a new deer stand somewhere, you don't necessarily want to be there, but you want to bring, and I've heard this many times, and I've done it before, and it seems to work, is that you bring an article of clothing that smells like you.
Yep.
You don't want to, you're not going to bring a bunch of articles from a bunch of different hunters, but you're going to bring you.
Sure.
Right, and that is going to represent something that they're familiar with. They do not identify that smell with danger.
Right.
If they go there routinely and they get used to the areas, and they smell that smell in and out, but nothing ever happens.
Right.
When you are there, why would they care?
Exactly.
Right.
It's conditioning. Yeah.
Conditioning.
You're basically conditioning, and I mean, as far as my line goes, there's times where I anticipate that it's going to be a solid 2 weeks before I catch anything. I'll set my traps knowing that I've got about, you still got to check them every day because you never know what you're going to catch. But I can go 2 weeks and not be concerned when it comes to coyotes because they are that heightened alert-wise with what's going on. But usually after that 2 week period, and I've been coming and going the whole time, heck, half the time they use, when I'm driving through cornfields and stuff to go check my traps, I see their tracks following in my tire tracks that they're using for travel the night before.
Right.
So they get used to it. They adapt. It's what they do.
Okay. All right. So if you're looking at the coyote as an adaptable species, we all know that they adapt extremely well. where do you as a trapper decide where to go? I mean, as a predator hunter, we've heard Al Morris say that he'll take his calls and he'll travel the roads, the circle, the loop that he's going to do, maybe a 9-mile loop, and he'll stop in every quarter mile or half mile and call, and he'll do it evening, middle of the night, and the first thing in the morning, just before sunrise, just to get a pattern on the dogs.
Yeah.
Where are they? Like they're notorious for traveling. They're notorious for moving where the food is, like animals go where food is. How do you, as a trapper, if you're I mean, there's one thing if you already know they're there, you're getting complaints, you know that it's a problem, you've been called into service.
Yep.
But if you're just plain old trying to maintain a certain area as part of your deer management plan,
Or you're going for pelts.
Yep.
Where
do you, and I'm going to use the word hunt, where do you hunt them with your traps?
And that's really what separates trapping from hunting in respect to targeting the coyote, because you're picking up on the most minute, tiny little details. You got to understand these animals are running a territory. They know every rock outcropping. They know every down tree. I mean, they know it, and they'll actually go around and they'll make those scents on those markers till on the outskirts of their territory. But when it comes to trapping, you're taking the whole concept of the land that you're trapping and you're magnifying it by 1,000. So I'll walk a stone wall, and I'll walk a stone wall, and I'll walk a stone wall till I find a break in a stone wall. Great place to set a trap. Half the time, I don't even need bait when I'm setting. When I get those rock stone wall breaks, because it's the path of least resistance. Those coyotes are going to travel that. And sure enough, you can just put a trap right there without any scent at all. Just put it right in the middle of that outcropping, depending on how big it is.
Yeah.
Funnel them a little bit, and you're usually going to be successful. The edges of fields, transition areas. So if I've got a cornfield and a wood line, I'm going to look for any identifying markers along that wood line. It could be a stump that just sticks out. You kind of almost have to. When I did this interview with Fred, and of course you were involved with that, I made an analogy to the magic eye puzzles.
Yeah.
And basically, that's what you need to do when you're walking these outcroppings and when you're walking these areas where coyotes are going to frequent. Blur your eyes a little bit and just see what stands out.
Okay.
Is there a row of fences and then all of a sudden there's a break in the fence? Is there a row of trees and then all of a sudden there's like a sewage pipe or something sticking out? In my childhood home where I grew up, my father had a brush pile back there. And once the brush pile was done and gone, you were left with this ring of ash.
Sure.
There was more fox and coyote scat on that pile of ash than anywhere else in the entire field. Because it was a marker.
That's interesting.
It was a detection place, and every canine is going to sit there and say, it's the same reason why your dog pees on a fire hydrant.
Yeah.
They know every other canine in the area is going to be focusing on whatever that anomaly is.
Yep.
And you want to make sure that your scat or your urine is there to say, this is mine.
Right.
Or just to let the other critters know, I'm here.
Yeah.
So any anomalies in the landscape are excellent places to set traps.
Okay.
Wherever you can find something that just is slightly out of place, and many trappers will actually make that. It's called what we would call like a scent post set.
Okay.
And there's 1,000 different variations. I'm using certain terminology here, but just understand that there's 100 different variations of every set, which is the creation of an area where a trap will be set. But some guys will take an old cow vertebrae, shove it right down in the middle of a field.
Really?
And then put a trap right in front of it.
Okay.
Any dog that picks up on that is going to come over and lift their leg, take a leak right on that.
Right.
Guarantee you. So those are areas
No
that you want to look for.
Right.
Is these little anomalies in the woods. You got to really, really get down and really, really intimately look at the land and say, what stands out here?
Okay. Do you do any coyote calling to find out if there's some in the area? Do calls come into play where you're trying to identify where a pack might be more relevant and then ground check it from there?
No,
don't care. Okay, it was just a concept that I thought
you certainly could. And I mean, if you really want to study, I mean, let's just say you guys got your favorite deer hunting spots. You know that there's family units in that deer hunting spot. Mm-hmm. Sure, mess with them a little bit. Give him a couple of calls. One of the greatest trappers I know in this state, who extensively, he probably has forgotten more about coyote trapping than I will ever know.
Okay.
But one thing that he would do is in the off season, once deer hunting was done, he had this little tree house set up that overlooked this marsh. He would sit there night after night and just study coyotes.
Really?
And just watch them.
Okay.
Just see what's going on. He'll call them in. He won't shoot any of them. He'll just call them in, see what they're doing. See, they're going over to that snowbank over there. Okay, that'd be a good place to put a trapper. Oh, yeah, see, they skirt the edge of that pine grove, and they actually come out on the other side. Over there would be a good place for a tree. Just little things like that of studying the animals.
Yeah.
So your idea of using game calls to kind of get an idea of the characteristics of that particular family unit, you're not far off.
To
If you
locate
really want to get into
where
it,
they might be, and then observe them from there.
Definitely.
That's an interesting concept. All right.
Yep.
All right, so let's get into the situation where or terrain. Let's talk about terrain a little bit. Have you noticed in your travels that coyotes will hang out in certain terrain over others? I mean, they're adaptable. We know that. They'll live in the city. They'll live in the mountains. If they're in the environment and where your deer management is going on, do they tend to congregate in certain areas over others?
I have to preface this by saying what works for me doesn't always work for everyone else.
Right.
There's always variations and
Sure.
exceptions to any rule. So I'm sure you'll get plenty of emails with people saying, "No, this is what I do. This is what with that."
Right.
But for me personally, it's like I said before. It's those transition zones. The edge of a river system where there's an outcropping and then dense woods, or a rocky outcropping that transitions into hardwoods. Any place where you get transition is usually where I'm going to find them. And, of course, food source plays into that as well because, again, coyotes, being as highly adaptable as they are, a lot of people think they're primarily carnivores. They're feeding on acorn mass. They're feeding on raspberries. I mean, they are opportunistic feeders 100%. They're going to go after apples. I mean, apple orchards are a great place to find coyotes. Cornfields.
Really?
They're going to take full advantage of corn. Oh, yeah, probably 90% of the calls I get for coyote control, you would think it's people's house pets or deer hunters. It's corn growers.
Really?
Yep.
Well, there's an interesting concept.
Oh, yeah, they will slam
Yeah.
corn.
I mean, because we think of them being pure carnivores. They're not.
Nope.
They're omnivores. Nope. They eat everything.
Yep. Crickets. I mean, you name it. Anything.
Yep. Right. They can do damage on a deer population if you let them, and if that's the easy target.
And realistically, I mean, I'm seeing the science and what I see seems to point more to fawn drop.
Yes.
That's when they're going to be the most interested in deer. And that in late winter, if there's deep enough snow where they can run them down. Coyotes, the eastern coyote, having the wolf DNA in it that it does, because, again, this whole notion of coy wolf, the eastern coyote is just a smorgasbord of wolf DNA, western coyote DNA, and domestic dog. That's why we have coyotes here in New Hampshire that are the size of German shepherds.
Right.
As they're with that wolf DNA in them, they do have more of that pack family unit hunting mentality than western coyotes do, where you'll never see a western coyote, or I'll eat my words, but
never say never.
I haven't seen too many western coyotes take down deer or large ungulates.
Right.
Whereas here in the Northeast, they can make short work of deer when they want to, certainly, but it's usually the fawn mortality. It's an opportunistic situation because once you get into the fall and stuff between apples, insects, raspberries, everything's in bloom. They got so many other food sources that they don't need to exert the energy.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, as a animal trying to survive, deer's the same way. We say deer are lazy. Well, they're not lazy. They're just conserving energy in the way that they know how to survive.
Right.
And that's exactly what coyotes do. They're,
any animal.
Any animal that has to survive in the wilderness.
Look at me. If the potato chips are sitting next to me, I'm reaching for them rather than getting up and making a cheeseburger.
Correct. It's just animal instinct.
Right.
I don't care what animal you are, whether you're apex or you're at the bottom of the food chain. Whatever's the easiest opportunity to consume energy or food for energy, that's what they're going to do.
And that's what still separates, even though there is that wolf DNA in our eastern coyotes, that's still what separates them from a purebred wolf. Because let's face it, most of your purebred wolves, primarily carnivores. That's your definition of a top apex predator killing machine.
Right.
Whereas the eastern coyote, highly opportunistic.
Yeah.
House cats to berries. Doesn't really matter.
Whatever's the easiest prey. And so that's why you usually don't see coyotes always chasing adult deer.
Right.
You're not going to see a lot of that.
Right.
You might see that when the snow is deep and there's no other forage.
Right.
And they've heavy rains, deep snows, and the coyotes can run on top of the snow and make it very easy for them as a pack to take down an adult deer.
Even on the ice. Look at how many ice kills have come out this year. Yeah.
That's common.
Yeah. Yep.
Or when fawns are dropping and when they're young and they're easy to manipulate.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's the opportunity. But when there's hardly any snow and you don't hear about coyotes running down adult deer hardly ever.
Same reason why me in the urban trapping setting, most of the situations where the missing cat signs go up usually correlates with young juvenile coyotes being kicked out of the family unit looking for their own territory. They're young, they're learning to hunt. Mm-hmm. That's what's going on. I mean, again, I think there's 1,000 other mortalities that happen to our house cats between fisher, owls, and hawks and everything else, cars that are out there. But most of my calls for nuisance coyotes and the science across the country would correlate with this. It's the younger pups when they're moving out, trying to, when they got a set of cojones and they're trying to show off their strength. That's usually when we have the biggest nuisance issues with coyote.
You watch, and it is when the pups are ready to get out of their hut, or you have a higher nutrition demand coming from the parents. They're even more opportunistic.
Right.
Last week in June, first week in July, you want to see the missing cat photos. They're more prevalent in those 2 weeks than any other. Look at your telephone poles.
Absolutely.
Those 2 weeks.
Yep.
Every time. Yep. So what happens once you do trap a coyote? You figured it all out. You kind of know where you want to go. You're successful. Mm-hmm. This is the part that I think, unless you're with a trapper, you'll never experience. And it's a curiosity, really, more than anything. Yes. How do you approach an animal that has teeth that can attack?
Yep.
How do you approach that safely and humanely?
And this is something that I think the trapping community has always skirted around traditionally. Because you don't want to talk about it.
One thing that you don't want to talk about.
But you know something? If we're going to see this activity survive for the scientific benefit that it promotes, we have to be able to talk about all of it.
Right.
And the simple fact of the matter is, animal rights groups, extremists, all kinds of people, even old-time trappers, it's almost like they look for creative ways to try and kill an animal.
Okay.
Everything from strangling to clubbing to whatever the case may be, everybody comes up with some kind of scheme of how to dispatch their animal. For me, I can tell you exactly from beginning to end how it works. I creep up slowly on the set and anticipate whether there's something there or not. Mm-hmm. I observe from a distance. I see that I have a coyote sleeping, because usually by the time I walk up on them, I'm walking carefully and quietly enough that they're asleep in the trap when I show up.
Okay.
They're just sitting there kind of laying low, doing their thing, going, I'm caught, and I don't know what to do next. The cell phone stays away because, again, you get all these videos and stuff online of guys walking up to coyotes and poking them while they're in the trap and shoving the phone in their face, and that does several things. One, it's going to tick off the neutral crowd that sits there and says, you guys are supposed to be respecting wildlife. Mm-hmm. And number two, you risk the chance of that animal pulling out of the trap.
Right.
Just that little bit of, you may have him by one toe, and that little push of anticipation there is enough for him to get his might pull out, and he's taking off down the mountainside while you're standing there going, what the heck just happened, with your cell phone sitting there. So with me, I don't take pictures of anything until after the dispatching is done. Cell phone stays away. I creep up slowly to the set. At this point, we've kind of locked eyes. They know I'm there. I know they're there. I walk up with a .22 rifle, and I mark my spot on that animal and pull the trigger and dispatch humanely. There's no taunting. There's no nonsense. There's this big, big issue with some old school trappers that, you're going to get blood on your pelt if you shoot them or something like that. It's pretty much nonsense. I mean, blood washes out, number one. And number two, I'm not here to play whack-a-mole with a coyote and a big stick. I'm here to dispatch the animal and get my pelt and move on. So a firearm is the most humane, ethical way of doing things, in my opinion. It's quick. It's done. It's effective. And I can move on to the next trap. So basically dispatching with a firearm. I use a .22 for the simple fact that any caliber bigger, and you're probably going to do some damage to the pelt. Because the whole point of trapping, if we're under this assumption of conservation and management and renewable resources, we're there for the pelt. Okay. So we want to make sure that pelt is in good shape.
Okay.
So going in there with a 30-06 or something and
Yeah.
You're going to have a grapefruit size hole through the darn thing.
Right.
So 22, right in the ear or the head, and it's done.
Okay.
That's how I go about it.
I can also see the aspect of, yes, you're looking to. There's a conservation effort, of course, across the board. How you're going about it is part of the plan. But at the same time, there may be several trappers that may just be looking to dispatch as many coyotes as they can just to keep the population under control, and they have no interest in the pelt whatsoever.
Sure.
It's kind of like the whole, well, I'm interested in the antlers or the meat or both. Some people just want the antlers.
Sure.
And I don't see anything wrong with that.
Nope,
I don't
not
see
at all.
anything wrong with people just wanting to reduce their
If you're
population.
conducting it legally and humanely, you're not going to get any qualms from me.
Correct. Same here. I don't. If you just want the meat and you want to shoot a smaller buck, so be it. That's your thing.
Sure.
If you want to just hunt for antlers and you hate venison, that's your thing. I don't care.
Sure.
I happen to like both, but that's just me.
Right.
So, in my case, if there was I guess a market for pelts, that might be an interesting aspect to bring to the whole process. Really.
Surprisingly, coyote pelts are currently some of the best money-wise when you're talking about national and international fur markets right now.
Okay.
Our fur markets throughout the years have tanked, kind of. They've never been really good since I started trapping. They go up and down, but it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. I mean, you're not gonna make a living off of just being a fur trapper.
No, you're not. You're not. But it's part of the experience.
Well, that's just it. I mean, there's still a very good marketable value for coyote pelts.
Right.
Westerns are sometimes preferred more over Easterns because of the fur patterns that we have here. If you're making a coat and you want uniform fur, the Eastern coyotes are such a mismatch with the DNA in there that the coats don't really line up as well. So a lot of times people prefer, fur buyers and such prefer Western coyotes. But again, there's exceptions to every rule. But for me particularly, coyote fur is awesome for just making your own garments. Let's just say you're out doing a winter deer hunt somewhere or something and you want something warm. I mean, coyote fur gloves, coyote fur hat, nice trim on your jacket or something. It's an organic material. It's a renewable resource. And I'll tell you right now, it'll warm you up better than half the synthetic stuff that's out there.
Yeah.
So there's certainly a market for the fur, even for your own benefit.
Right.
Not necessarily just to sell in a fur market. You can get $25-$30 or so for a pelt.
Right.
But for your own benefit, take that thing home, skin it, flesh it, dry it, stretch it, tan it, and do your thing.
Right. Okay. For the people that really have no interest in the pelt, what do you do with well, even if you grab the pelt, what do you do with the carcass after? I mean, you got a bunch of body parts hanging around.
Sure.
What do you do with it? How do you dispose of it?
It depends. I've got certain areas that are, wide tracts of land that are okay with the disposal of carcasses. We want to be mindful of the public, obviously, with any unused parts of the animal, because that can certainly tick the wrong people off if you're throwing a trash bag full of coyote parts out in someone's backyard or something. So proper, disposal is always good. But let's just say you're not interested in the pelt. You've got this animal laying here now that you just shot in a trap. What do you do now? A lot of hunters bring their pelts to me. I'll skin them out. Find yourself a local trapper who's interested in that sort of thing. They'll always be happy to take it. The one thing I will say, what a lot of hunters don't realize, because this happens to me every year, I'll have a hunter call me up and say, hey, I was out deer hunting. It turned into a coyote hunt. I got a coyote here for you.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'll take it. 4 days later, they show up at my house with a coyote in the back of the truck. Right. Coyotes are a species. Coyotes, fox, and bobcat are all species that get what's called green belly. So essentially what happens is they have a very thin stomach lining between the skin of the fur and the stomach.
Gotcha.
They have a primarily carnivorous diet. So that means all the meat that they've consumed is now decaying and it rots faster. So what happens to me is 8 hours after you've shot that coyote and it's been sitting in the back of your truck, you give it to me, I'm skinning the animal out, and I get down along the waist, and it's completely rotten on the inside.
Gotcha.
Because it has spoiled at that point. So you almost have to treat the animal like you would a deer. You do the proper things with deer between field dressing and trying to preserve that meat, cool that meat down, that whole thing. You don't have to obviously field dress a coyote, but if you do know someone that's going to take the pelt, or you're going to take the pelt and try to do something with it, as soon as that animal is shot, it should be either hung up or laid on its back so that that stomach is pulled away from that smooth skin area.
Gotcha.
And that'll help slow the process of that decay, so that you can get it someplace where you can skin it and take care of it and still have a valuable pelt.
That's good to know. That's
because otherwise, what'll happen is that bacteria, even if you try to skin that out, when you go to tan it, all the hair in that area is going to fall right out.
Okay.
It's called slippage.
Gotcha. Can you? I mean, and then if you don't know a trapper, if you don't have a buddy that's a trapper, and you just need to dispose of it, what do? You just end up throwing it, digging a hole and throwing it in the hole, or you put it on a bait pile? Will the coyotes come eat other coyotes?
There's some debate about that, about whether or not coyotes will eat other coyotes. I say they will. I've had situations where coyotes have come in to other areas where I've dumped not necessarily full coyote carcasses, but whatever was left that I didn't use. Because typically off of every coyote I harvest, the pelt's taken and then the skull is taken for education purposes. There's schools across the country that like that stuff for their biology class and stuff like that. So those are the two parts of the animal that I take. And then you get into the slippery slope of, well, you shouldn't be killing it if you're not eating it. Well, you take a look at a coyote carcass. There's not a lot of meat on that puppy to begin with.
Right.
There's not really much there.
Right.
And I think Steve Ranella and a couple of other guys have done episodes where they eat the meat.
Well, I've
which
been
is
seeing
great.
more and more of that. People are eating coyote meat.
Which you think about it, I mean, look at, other countries that do eat dog.
Right. I mean, it would probably be a pretty decent meat.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as it hasn't gone in the gangrene phase.
Well, exactly.
Right?
Again, proper handling. But I personally, I eat a lot of what I trap. Mm-hmm. Coyotes are not one as of yet. But I would certainly, if someone was going to go through the trouble of preparing it, I probably wouldn't offend them. I'd have a bite and see what it's like.
And looking at some of the reactions of the people that are eating the coyote on TV, they're like, it's pretty darn good, and now I know what I'm going to do with it because they're not sniffing their nose is not turning up at it like, oh my God, it's the worst thing I ever ate.
Exactly.
They're like, yeah, I'm going in for more.
Yep. So that's certainly a possibility if you're, if you want to try and taste it. Obviously, I wouldn't be going, sampling meat from anything that looks sick, number one, or mange or any of that stuff that is commonly found in our canine species. But once you've taken what you need to take off of it, then I usually just find an area that's away from public view where that carcass can then be returned to nature. And even if other coyotes don't feed on it, there's going to be a plethora of mice and other creatures that will use that organic material to their benefit. So.
Yeah. I've had coyote sets before, night hunting sets where I've killed coyotes. I left the coyote on the pile. Mm-hmm. And it just for an observation point, it seemed to deter some of those coyotes from coming back to that spot. Depending
on what they've witnessed or if something don't seem right, hey, Jimmy's been laying over there for, the last 45 minutes. He hasn't moved. Something's not right.
Right.
I've seen situations where they come right up to it and check it out, and they'll repeatedly come back and check out another coyote. And it may not even be a coyote from their quote-unquote family unit.
Yeah.
The only thing I can assess from that is the fact that, keep in mind, these coyotes have glands. They have glands in their legs and things like that, and in their scat as a scent attractant for other coyotes. Sometimes that'll bring them in too.
Yeah.
Depending on what the situation is. You use coyote urine to lure other coyotes to your traps in some cases.
So I mean, putting the coyote there could also have been me being around that particular area more often because I had a camera on it and we were checking the bait piles and adding more deer to the pile from roadkills, and it brought them in for a little while, but after we started killing them there, they got pretty smart. They stopped coming.
That adaptability. They sit there and say,
smart.
"Hey, Tim and John haven't been showing up since they went over to that bait pile. I think we're gonna back off."
There seems to be a flash coming from that little hut up there on the hill every time we show up. So I think I'm going to stop coming. It's ended up feeding two American bald eagles all winter long is what ended up happening. They fed on. I think we fed them more than we did the coyotes. But
a hungry animal is not going to be too picky. Yeah. The only creature I have not seen be consumed by anything is otter.
Really?
And I don't know why.
Huh.
Not even the Native Americans would eat them, supposedly.
No kidding.
So I don't know what it is about otter, but that's really the only creature that I've found that nothing will touch the carcass.
Yeah. Fascinating. Now, you had mentioned that if you find your spot where you're going to place the trap, after you trap something in that location, can you go back to that same location?
Oh, goodness, yeah.
And it becomes a good spot no matter what. So they're not necessarily becoming keen to, hey, every time we show up here, we disappear.
It depends. Again, what part of that family unit you're catching? Is it alpha? Is it a beta? What scent contamination is going on there? I mean, there's 150 different variables, but I will say that it adds to your benefit in the sense that when a coyote is in a trap or any canine for the most part, they'll produce what's called a catch circle.
Okay.
So there'll be an area from where the trap is staked down. That animal is, pulling around 360 degrees and actually leaving a mark in the ground. That becomes a visual marker. So when you remake that set, now other critters that are trotting by there are going, what's that big round patch of dirt there? That wasn't there last week when I came through here. Let's go check that out. And then if you've got bait or something in there, now you've got them committed to checking that out. Coyotes, when they're sitting in traps, again, because we're just humanely restraining them, they're still doing their business. So they're urinating, they're leaving scat.
Right.
That's all attractants.
Right.
So if you've got a coyote that's been caught in a trap, you dispatch that animal.
Yeah.
Definitely remake that set, because I'll guarantee you'll probably have somebody else coming by. You may not catch them all, but you'll certainly have a few more coming by.
Okay.
And people even think I'm crazy because I will be walking in the woods with sandwich bags. And if I find coyote scat, I'm picking it up.
Really?
And I'll actually use that at a set somewhere where I put my trap, because now I've ticked off another coyote because he's saying there's a foreign coyote in my territory.
Gotcha.
What's going on here?
Okay.
I'm going to pee on that turd.
Right. I'm always amazed at where coyotes poop. They always poop on rocks.
Again,
right?
It's a visual marker.
Yeah.
So whatever was distinguishable about that rock, they somehow know that other coyotes or other canines who are going in that area are going to look at that same rock.
It's never in the dirt. It's never on a big rock. It's always just a rock that's visual.
Yep.
That's just barely mounded over the rest of the dirt.
Yep.
And there's coyote poop guy.
That's another prime example of those visual distinguishable markers. I'd be putting a trap right at the base of that rock.
Gotcha. Okay. Good to know. So the blog post that you wrote, it was about a petition to stop hunting the coyote during certain times of the year.
Yep.
Currently in New Hampshire, you can hunt them all times of the year.
Correct.
But the hunting season for coyotes does not correlate to the trapping season, correct? They're different.
Correct.
All right. Can you speak of the two seasons there?
Yeah, basically, and forgive me because I'm not well versed in the purposes of why there is a year-round coyote hunting season. I assume it dates back to, before the coyote was this creature that it is today, where it was a full-out. I mean, you think about it this way: in New Hampshire, we don't have open seasons on woodchucks. I mean, we don't have closed seasons on woodchucks. You can shoot woodchucks year-round if you'd like. Porcupines, no closed season.
Right.
So, again, there's this mentality of whether you look at the coyote as vermin or as a game species. Game species typically have regulated seasons for protection reasons. Clearly, with the coyote having a year-round hunting season, biologists or whoever's in charge of that, it doesn't feel that protections are needed on the coyote, which is an ambiguous thought. I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. I'm just saying that would be the thought process, is that there's no need for those protections similar to woodchucks, similar to porcupines.
Yeah, right. No, I'm following your train of thought there.
I mean, there's no need for a closing of a season.
Right.
Trapping, on the other hand, primarily when you're doing trapping, you're trapping for the procurement of the pelt. It has developed into a great nuisance control tool, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty, the purpose of trapping is the procurement of the pelt, which is why we have a season on coyotes here, because the pelt is only valuable for X amount of months throughout the year. A pelt in June isn't going to be thick, warm, and insulating. They're usually mangy, nasty. They're just no good. What happens, it goes by moon phases. A lot of people think it goes by the temperature. It doesn't. It goes by moon phases.
Okay.
Basically, the more lack of daylight we have, the more prime that pelt becomes.
Yeah.
So right around December, right around the solstice, is a great time to be targeting coyotes, whether it's through hunting or trapping. because that's when the pelt is going to be A, the most valuable, and B, for your own personal use, is going to be the thickest and most versatile.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Moon phase seems to influence deer and hunters everything these days.
Oh, God. And it really does. I mean, it's like going back to when I started with night hunting with Coyote. I would go by moon phases.
No kidding.
That would be my attraction. Mainly because, a full moon, you can see everything when you don't need a spotlight. Right? You can pretty much see everything that's moving on that white snow.
Oh, yeah.
That's the best time for me to do coyote hunting.
That's when I like to go. When it was when I knew I had activity, I had a game camera. I'd look at tracks. The camera didn't really work because it was a cheap camera and it wouldn't shoot pictures below 32 degrees, so it was kind of useless. But you could tell that there was a lot of activity based off of the tracks, and I could see that the full moon was coming, and it was on the night of the full moon that I killed a coyote, and I didn't need any illumination device. That thing was through the scope. It was like, wow, you could see everything.
Another thing for your listeners, a little tidbit, and I'd be curious to see if some of your listeners try this out and tell me whether I'm right or wrong. Watch the weather. A night or 2 nights before a storm front comes through, everything's moving.
Right.
That's when I'm the most successful at trapping. That's when I was the most successful with hunting. If you got a full moon that was coming a few days before a big storm, everything was moving. It's like a city out there.
Interesting you say that, because I think a trapper could be a better litmus test for that exact theory. Is that okay? Yeah, maybe you see more deer, or you think you see more deer before the big storm or during a certain moon phase, and certainly those are observational.
Yep.
But if you can say, "Hey, I triggered 5 of my traps during this time frame," that instead of 1. During the regular time, you're on something.
Or if I have a problem critter. If I'm out there, I take care of a couple of fish raising farms and things like that. Big mink predation. I always catch my mink the day before a storm.
That's crazy.
Always. I can count on it. I will have nothing for weeks. And if there's a storm front coming through, I make sure those traps are in full working order, because I know there's going to be something.
And that's statistical. Those are actual numbers that you can put statistically on paper. Say, yes, there is something to this.
In a full moon, for some reason, I get better luck with raccoons during full moons. And I don't know what it is, especially with foothold traps in water. I don't know if it's the light of the trap shining, flickering off of the moon phase, looking like a fish scale or something, but I always catch more raccoons during full moons.
Gotcha. All right, very good. Do you want to speak of either a deer hunting story, or do you want to go with a trapping story?
I can go with a deer observation story. How's that?
Okay, let's go there.
Because I'll tell you right now, I will readily admit, just like I did on Fred's show, I sat there and I said, I don't really do a lot of turkey hunting, It's just not something that has always interested me. But once I actually did turkey hunting, I was blown away by. I had more respect for it, because it's a tricky thing to do, and hunting's the same way. I have deer hunted in the past, don't really have any amazing stories about it, but for the longest time, I was always involved with trapping, and that always took up so much of my time that I never really got into a lot of deer hunting as much as I wanted to, because let's face it, I would love the meat. But trapping seasons always fall right on top of deer hunting seasons here in New Hampshire, and when you're going after all these species at once, you just don't have time to get deer hunting in. But I always kind of laughed and somewhat scoffed at the idea of big bucks.
Yeah.
I never really saw, and I'm talking years ago, I never really saw the interest in whether it's a doe or whether it's a giant buck with this huge rack. And for me, it's more of a subsistence type thing. I just had no interest in it, and I kind of always laughed at guys who did. And there was this one time about 4 years back, I had gotten rights to a very, very large tract of land that the individual was actually trying to set up for his deer hunting. He was putting food plots out, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
It was in a very rural part of the state here. And he brought me in and said, I want you to, thin the coyote numbers a little bit. I'm going to give you rights to trap for the fur pelts for coyotes. Great. And I come walking across this dam, and I'm walking across this marsh, and there's this crash in the woods next to me. And all of a sudden, as soon as I lock eyes with this buck. And this buck, to this day, you can tell just by the way I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
I have never seen a more majestic, amazing creature. This thing had no neck. I mean, this thing I thought it was an elk at first.
Right.
I swear to God, Jay. I mean, the rack was just so thick. I mean, having trouble describing it. It's that amazing to me. It was basically like seeing Bigfoot to me.
Yeah.
I have never seen an animal this majestic, broad, just brute, dominant force
Yep.
of nature.
The pinnacle of his species.
Amazing.
Right.
Absolutely amazing. And he bounded off into the woods, and he didn't run like a deer, like a doe typically skips across the road. This thing bounded with brute force. It just slammed right through the woods, and it just knocked everything down in its path. And I stood there for about 10 minutes, and then as soon as I got back to the truck, it hit me. Like, this is what these guys are talking about. When they're going after when someone says monster buck, or when someone's heart races over shooting a big buck, I get it now.
Right.
I understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
'Cause that's an amazing animal.
Yeah, you don't have to be a hunter to like gasp a little bit, like, wow.
I was speechless. I mean, I'm
You get
texting the
speechless,
landowner,
right.
and I'm going, "You're not going to believe this." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, no, that's cool." And I'm like, "No, you don't understand. This amazing thing just happened."
Right. Yeah, it's a hard thing to describe to somebody that doesn't appreciate it. But
Yeah.
yeah, you do,
New respect right there.
You do kind of swallow some air. You're like,
It's just
Right?
an amazing animal. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
You think to yourself, we see deer all over the place, and it's very easy to get complacent, but it's an amazing animal.
it really is.
It really is.
It really is. Just to touch real quick on, we talked about the seasons and how there was a petition based off of your blog post that
Yep.
of 200 people that or thereabouts that wanted to shut down the seasons for coyote hunting. Now, that's not what you're doing. You're trapping, but this is coyote hunting.
Yep.
What was that all about? Why were they trying to do it, and who were they?
It's a very interesting game of strategy that is going on, not only here in New Hampshire, but national, when it comes to what I would constitute as being quote-unquote animal rights or antis, people who are against all aspects of hunting and trapping. And it's funny because depending on what the subject is, a lot of these groups will say, "Oh, no, we're okay with your turkey hunting. We just don't like trapping." And then all of a sudden, it's turkey season, and they're out there saying, "Post your sign, don't let anyone turkey hunt here." Long story short, they put out this petition to shut down coyote hunt, to put a close to the coyote hunting season, because right now our season goes year round.
Right.
And at first, they dictated that on the fact that it was pup rearing months, and you shouldn't be hunting animals when they're having their litters. And again, this gets down to the argument of what you regard the coyote as. I haven't taken a position on that for several reasons. I don't have any skin in that game, like you said, because I'm a trapper.
This is between as a game or vermin.
This is an argument for biologists to sit there and say whether hunting year round actually adversely affects pup rearing, because there's still no scientific data to suggest that we're implicating or we're having a detriment while they're rearing their pups. I mean, there's no other hunting seasons really going on that time of year.
Right.
So you do have less people out in the field. The only exception would be landowners, who have individual problems with coyotes or something like that, taking it of themselves to pick off a couple here and there. But long story short, my issue wasn't necessarily with that petition. They got their reasons for it. It is what it is. It was the scientific data that they presented as a result, basically saying, "Oh, and by the way, not only should you not be hunting coyotes during their pup rearing months, you shouldn't be hunting coyotes at all, because science has shown that the more coyotes you hunt, the faster they breed. So you're just breeding superhuman coyote, basically super coyotes that will continue to breed incredibly." Basically, I found it comparable to the movie Gremlins. You get water on them and they reproduce or something. I mean, there is a small speckle of science behind the what they call responsive reproduction.
Responsive reproduction, sure, they have that ability, but
there's some trickling behind that. But the producers of those studies and the individual biologists who came out with those studies have gone on record since those studies as saying, "Look, yes, there's some truth to this, but it was under perfect conditions, first of all, and second of all, it shouldn't be. It's being taken out of context when you're arguing coyote management."
Right.
Because again, in the modern world, we're not talking about coyote elimination. We're talking about coyote management.
Right.
And from what I've been able to find, and my blog post kind of goes a little in depth into it, but it all started with this cascade effect out in the West when they reintroduced wolves. You had this new breed of ecologist or whatever you want to call it, basically saying, well, all predators are great. And since they manage their own populations, we shouldn't be hunting them at all. We should just let them be because they're going to have a top-down effect on all the other creatures in life. And they're basing a lot of this stuff off the reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone, which, yes, there is, again, some truth to that idea, but that was because there was no hunting in Yellowstone.
Right.
There's no hunting permitted there. There's no vehicles there. There's no other real forms of mortality other than disease and starvation.
Right.
So when you introduce an apex predator to an area where ungulates like elk have had full reign to decimate the property, the land mass without any management, of course they're going to have beneficial effects. They're going to reduce that elk population, which in turn is going to reduce browsing, which in turn is going to bring in beaver.
Because they're bringing in the hunter.
Exactly.
Where the hunter did not exist.
Exactly. And that's the component. This is why all science is important with context. Because you've got people now nationally. There's a big push for it up here in the Northeast, but I promise you, people across the country, if they haven't witnessed this movement yet, you will be. Basically saying all predators are great. They don't need any management. We shouldn't be doing anything with them. Let them go turn the entire country into Yellowstone. Well, the problem is the rest of the country isn't Yellowstone. We hunt here, you know, and we also don't have wolves here. We have eastern coyotes, which is a subspecies. So there was a little bit of pseudoscience, junk science, if you will, that was being perpetuated with that. Basically, some people were getting on a soapbox saying this trophic cascade model basically is the crux for why we shouldn't be managing animals at all. And then you start getting into responsive reproduction, but then you start getting into self-regulation. Now, in the first breath, responsive reproduction and self-regulation somewhat sound like similar things.
Yeah.
They're extremely different.
Let's ask Australia how that's working out.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Where they have more feral animals than they have people by a long shot, right?
Yeah.
And they're saying goodbye to many indigenous species simply because the kitty cats are running rampant.
Again, it comes down to moral wisdom of management.
Right.
We have the bigger brains. We can't help the fact that we were blessed with the bigger brains to see that, yes, we're culling some surplus animals, but at the same time, it's benefiting and managing all species. Self-regulation, as I stated in my blog post, is just a polite way of saying animals die from disease and starvation when food sources get depleted.
That's right.
There's no magic Ouija board science behind it, as much as someone wants to try and claim there is.
Right.
It's the simple fact that you have death, disease, and starvation. Mother Nature will regulate her populations how she sees fit. The difference is when you add the human element, we have the ability to do that in a more moral way instead of, like, for instance, what we have up here with bobcats. There's no hunting or trapping season on bobcats. Those surplus animals, when they die of disease, which they have been, I've got confirmation that they are in good numbers, whether they're hit by cars, they're thrown in the trash.
Right.
They're not used for anything. The pelt's not being used. The meat's not being used. The bones aren't being used.
Right.
They're being thrown away.
Right.
And when you remove regulated hunting and trapping from that equation, that's what happens with wildlife. They die off. You know, I'm not saying you're going to completely see an extinction of all of our fur-bearing and ungulate species, but at the same time, it's wanton waste in its purest form. I mean, right there. You know, why have to have a sharpshooter come out and pick off, 80, 90 deer because they're browsing to the point of starvation? Yeah. When you can have regulated hunting out there controlling these populations.
This was our show last week. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to it, but it was all about Morgantown, West Virginia.
Exactly.
Fantastic story.
Yeah, ties right in.
Yep. Right?
Absolutely.
You didn't hire a company and pay big bucks through your tax dollars to come have somebody sharpshoot their way through the herd and get it under control temporarily.
Yep.
You formed a band of 80 hunters that were tested for their abilities.
Yep.
Given safety instructions and how to approach discreetly so that you're really not seen, and managed to cull the herd and donate thousands of pounds of meat to those in need.
That's exactly right. That's how it works, and that's there is this growing trend of trying to remove the human element from that.
Right.
That we somehow shouldn't be quote unquote meddling in what nature is doing. And similar to Morgantown, it's like what me and Fred talked about when I was on the show with Fred. Right. It's this idea that nature will somehow take care of itself. Yeah, well, it will take care of itself. You're not going to like the results, but
we are already meddling here anyway. We have to meddle in this whole thing to keep it balanced.
Well, that's the problem, is that the biggest detriment to our wildlife is habitat loss. That's a scientific fact.
If you built your own human shelter, you've already meddled in
exactly, and
the imbalance.
When you drive your Subaru to my events to petition fur trapping, that death machine you're in is also contributing.
That's right.
By proxy.
Yeah.
So basically, that's what it boils down to. And my whole argument, basically, with that article and this whole petition wasn't necessarily the breeding aspect of it, but I was applauding the department because the department turned around and their biologists tried to put a close to the season to, quote unquote, appease these groups and make them happy and think that somehow that'll make them go away. Well, they're not going away. They're not going anywhere. But the law and rulemaking committee of that Fish and Game department basically said, where's the science that shows that we're having a negative impact on coyotes?
Right.
There is none. Well, don't you think you should get some before we make a decision on restricting hunting?
Right.
That's basically what it came down to. So it hasn't necessarily been rejected, that proposal. It's been tabled until we can develop science, which I'm cheering for 100% because this hybrid cryptic species of coyote that we have here in the Northeast, there isn't a lot of science on it. There's a lot of pseudoscience, and there's a lot of debate about science from the 1970s, but there's not a lot of updated science about coyote impact in New Hampshire.
Right. And I don't think there's too many hunters that would say, give me the science.
Right.
And I say, don't give me the science. I just want them dead. No, I think every hunter out there has an appreciation for most of nature and will say, yes, give me the science. And if your science tells me that we shouldn't be hunting them, we'll go with that.
Right.
But don't just walk in here and say we can't stop. We have to stop hunting them because of some weird, tainted, out of context science that you try to deliver to make it in your favor. No, remove yourself from all of the influences. Go find an independent third party and let them conduct it, and then report back. And if what they tell us is that we shouldn't be hunting them, we don't hunt them.
And that's the growing trend. That's why I've been accused of being Chicken Little in the past, but for the most part, what I've talked about has come to fruition. And I can tell you that there is a growing movement nationwide of, our petition signs and our activism doesn't seem to be getting the message across. Now we're going to start twisting science. And I think what you're going to see is independent biologists nationwide are going to say enough of this crap.
Right.
And you're going to have something come to a head here pretty soon where people who aren't responding right now because they don't want to get involved in the debate are going to be forced to get involved because these groups are just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing this nonsensical pseudoscience until they get what they want.
Yeah. Right.
So, and that's another reason why we support our local fish and game departments, because once this stuff goes to the legislature in your own state, it no longer becomes a scientific debate. It becomes a cultural and public media frenzied debate, which, let's face it, we don't do well in that sector.
No.
Because it's just too much of a guerrilla warfare kind of debate. There's just too much out there. When you've got someone who's making a decision on wildlife management based on how many votes they're going to get, that's some scary stuff for the future of our wildlife.
We want to keep it in the biology realm.
Exactly. And
100%.
That's why we need to hold people accountable when these comments about science and this study shows this or this study shows that. We need to hold people accountable to that, and that's why I educate people. I teach people how to read scientific white papers.
Yeah.
Don't just go for an opinion article. Ask to see the science.
Right.
And look at the data for yourself and decode that.
Right.
I know it can be tough. It's heavy word crunching.
I'll even go one step further. You want to make sure that you understand who conducted the survey or the science and who paid for it.
Definitely.
Because I've seen this happen in my science background. They will pay you to get the answer that they want. So you have to be careful about where, not only who conducted it, but who was the financials behind it.
Definitely.
Right.
Oh, yeah. No, that's 100% true. And if you don't think that people who are intolerant of any and all hunting and trapping and fishing activities, if you don't think that they're putting their funding behind stuff like that, you got another thing coming.
Absolutely. So. Very good. All right, I've got 10 rapid fire questions for you, Jeff. All right, what's your number one hunting tip of all time, or in this case, trapping tip of all time?
Set on sign.
All right, excellent. What's that one thing that you can't go into the woods without? It drives you crazy if you leave it in the truck.
Well, walking stick, I guess, would be
Walking stick.
definitely. I've got this one walking stick that has all the notches for all the beaver I've ever trapped, and it's a beaver chew stick that a friend of mine whittled down, and he shellacked it and all kinds of stuff. That thing has gotten me out of more pinches and trouble than I can shake a stick at.
Nothing
no pun
better
intended.
But there's nothing better than a good walking stick, man.
Yeah. No, poking around,
Absolutely.
poke it, scat, or whatever you got to do. You know?
Oh, yeah, sticks are great. All right, what's your biggest pet peeve in life?
Animal rights activists.
That's a pretty common one. How old are you today?
I am 30.
You're 30. What would you tell the 15-year-old Jeff Traynor, knowing what you know today about life?
Go for a biology degree.
Good one. All right. You're at a hunting convention somewhere in the world. Stranger comes up to you and they ask you what you do for a living. What do you tell them?
I am a wildlife control operator.
Excellent. What'd you have for breakfast this morning?
Nothing.
Didn't
have my Wheaties this morning.
Not even like a little possum bacon or anything?
Nothing this morning. I had my coffee. That was it.
Okay. All right. You get your own billboard. It's a blank canvas. You can put anything you want on it. What would it say?
Oh, jeez. I don't know. You caught me off guard.
Right. How about a hashtag? What would your hashtag be that you would paste on this white back billboard?
Huntervationist.
Huntervationist.
A message from the Sportsman's Alliance. Excellent.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
All right. If I say the word successful to you, who's the first person that pops into your head and why?
My father.
Okay. And why?
For what I know today. Basically, I wouldn't be where I'm at today if he hadn't have dragged me out and made me the wood booger that I am today.
Those little life lessons that they give you without you don't even know what they're talking about, but you figure it out later in life. What's a day in your life look like?
Busy.
Okay.
Busy.
What time do you rise?
Yeah, it depends. 6 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m., but I'm usually going till about midnight.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Well, between writing for the blog and day jobs and nuisance control work on the side and all kinds of stuff, it's always something.
And then what's a typical hunting day in your life look like if you're out hunting or just trapping?
Cold and wet.
Cold and wet. Life of a trapper, man.
That's where the critters are, though, man.
Right. I've heard that. All right, so if we have not covered enough material here today, if we've generated more questions, which is always possible, where can we go to locate you to ask the questions?
I'd say you can head over to livefreeandtrap.com. That's my trapping advocacy website. I've got a blog. I've got some moderate how-tos and basic generalizations on trapping. You can find me on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, with the same handle, Live Free and Trap.
Live Free and Trap. All right, man. Jeff, thanks for coming by, man. It's been a pleasure, an honor to talk trapping with you. It's fascinating subject matter to me. It's something I am so interested in doing myself. I've shared that with you, obviously, and I want to get into it at some point. So thanks for coming in the studios.
I appreciate it, and I look forward to your endeavors with it, and I thank you guys for everything you do to promote it as well. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate Jeff coming on the show and exploring the world of the trapper. We definitely wanted to know more about the coyote aspects of trapping and how it could be relative to deer management programs. Jeff is definitely a conservationist and really enlightened me to the world of adding trapping to my plan. I hunt the coyote. I love to hunt, period, as everyone I'm sure knows by now. But trapping is something I haven't gotten into. But man, I am so intrigued by this whole aspect. And if you want to follow Jeff and his really good website at livefreeandtrap.com. He explores all kinds of concepts that are relative to trapping, but also all those things that I think sportsmen like you listening to the show should be focused on. He brings up a lot of good points and points out those things that the middle ground might be being fueled by the 10% antis, that makes some really good points about those things that might be threatening our lifestyle as hunters. So definitely go check out Jeff's website. He puts up good blogs frequently and blog posts and really interesting concepts and points that I think we should all be thinking about. So, Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tie-ins tip of the week this week? Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty at BigBuckRegistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter at Chasing Antler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, and Blueberry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Sure is. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.